When the blow landed, it sounded less like flesh and more like falling glass. Laughter rose as if it were waiting for a cue. Champagne fizzed and flashed. Someone held a phone steady to capture the moment. My name is Lauren Pierce. I am 34 years old, and at my graduation celebration my father slapped me across the face and announced, in front of family, friends, and cameras, that I was a disgrace and would be cut out of the $930 million will. Break time equals 2/. If you're watching this, drop a comment. What would you do if your family made your humiliation a spectacle? Hit like and subscribe, you'll want to keep listening. I didn't yell. I didn't beg. I left the room, diploma in hand, and the laughter pressed against my back like a weight. I sat in my car and let the tears come, then wiped them away with the kind of neatness grown from practice. Aunt June, my one loyal, honest relative, a postal worker who wore truth like a coat, texted, "Write it down. Don't let them turn your memory into rumor." So I did. I wrote the words, the names, the phone's recording. I wrote down who laughed first and who filmed second. By 9 the next morning, the knock on my door was sharp and professional. 5 people in black suits stood on my stoop. A man offered a leather folder. "Ms. Pierce," he said, "we represent the Pierce family estate." Their presence smelled of ink and consequence. They did not come to comfort me. They came to warn me. The family had already rehearsed countermeasures. They had lawyers on call in case a public humiliation needed legal muscle to make its version stick. I set the folder on my kitchen counter and felt something settle beneath the panic. An exact, cold clarity. If they would weaponize a slap, I would answer with facts. Evidence would be my language where shame had been theirs. They left politely, but the knock changed the room. Outside, men in tailored coats checked their watches as if a performance had a schedule. Inside, I opened a new document and typed the date, time, the words he'd spoken, the laughter, and the names of those who had recorded. When I closed my laptop, the phone rang. It was my father's attorney. He spoke carefully. "Miss Pierce, your father has made certain declarations. This is unpleasant for everyone." His tone implied civility. His phrasing implied possibility. Declarations that could be formalized, wills that could be amended. I invited the attorney in and poured coffee. He coughed politely through a script about family privacy. Somewhere between his disclaimers I realized what he was doing. Testing the water. I was the one who would either flail in public or keep a ledger in private. Backstory in quick brushstrokes. Dad, Victor Pierce, retired real estate magnate. Polished, public, practiced at performance. Mom, Evelyn, social chair and fundraiser. Fluent in optics. Sister, Clara, PR executive born to shape narratives. Quick with a smile that could close a room. Aunt June, postal worker, small wallet, huge honesty. My contrast and compass. She texted encouragement and drove over to bring me pie. If you're watching this, tell me below. Have you ever felt the hush of power crowding your voice? Hit like and subscribe. This is where I transform outrage into organization. I told the attorney I had been victimized in a public performance. He sighed and said, "You could respond emotionally. Or you could respond structurally." He left his card and a suggestion. Gather evidence, get counsel, and prepare for the optics war. I took Aunt June's advice. I pulled receipts, bank transfers, family gifts, emergency loans I'd covered, wires I'd sent without fanfare. For years I'd been the quiet insurance policy. Paying medical copays, wiring funds for business shortfalls, covering tax deadlines. My generosity, they assumed, was inexhaustible. My kindness had been misread as an open financial line. I built a ledger. Date, amount, recipient, reason, and whether a verbal promise to repay existed. I attached screenshots of texts. "Thanks sis, I'll pay you next Friday," where Fridays became placeholders. I also saved the video clip the party's cameras captured. One of the phones had zoomed in on my father's face while he spoke his threat. At noon I called a lawyer recommended by a friend. She said the same clean thing Victor's attorney had hinted at. Strategy. You want to control the record. Paper helps. So does timing. We'll file a statement only when it's strategic. I placed the ledger in a folder and the folder in a drawer. The drawer felt like armor. That evening, someone leaked a short clip to the local news. The news segment was perfectly edited. The slap, the echoing laugh, my retreating back. The anchor said dryly that the Pierce scandal was the talk of the gala. Comments flooded social channels with simplified verdicts. People love clean stories. Villain, victim, punchline. My father's narrative had a catchy headline. I watched the clip with the ledger open, the numbers beside the footage. I was not naive, I had seen how stories eat nuance. I could either let the clip become the whole story or I could place another object in the room. Documentation. Aunt June stood steady. They'll try to make you small by making you loud, she said. Don't be loud. Be documented. We printed bank statements. We gathered emails where my father had requested transfers to cover a shortfall. We pulled incorporation records and tax filings that suggested the empire's edges were not as flush as the glossy brochures. If you're watching, say below whether you've ever felt your life get edited down into a 30-second clip. Subscribe, because evidence is sometimes louder than outrage. A friend offered to take the ledger to a private forensic accountant. The accountant looked at numbers and then at the clip. He publicizes a slap, but the estate's papers tell a different story, she said. Watch where assets move. She also warned, quietly, that hostile family disputes over large estates often mask other motives. Tax positioning, creditor pressure, or darker manipulations. I filed a complaint with the local station about the way the clip cut context. The station washed its hands at the edges. Editor's choice, they said, but they took one of my longer clips for balance. The internet for once saw two frames, the slap and then the receipts. That same night, a courier delivered a white envelope to my building. Inside, a formal letter from Victor's counsel demanding I refrain from disparaging conduct, and threatening to seek a declaratory judgment that could affect my future inheritance claims. I sat with the letter beside the ledger and realized the system had two voices. His attorney's phrases and my bank statements. One clattered loudly on TV, the other sat quietly in law offices and fiduciary ledgers. I decided to move the quiet to the center. I called a top firm that night and asked them to hold my folder until the moment the law would matter more than the applause. They filed paperwork. The Pierce legal team moved to formalize the disinheritance, drafting an amendment to the will, claiming estrangement and conduct unbecoming the family. The press interpreted the filings as theatrical. My lawyer, soft-spoken and precise, said the filings were a test. You can remove emotion. You can respond with procedure. I arranged a meeting with the state counsel, forensic accountants, and a private investigator. We built a timeline that compiled gifts, transfers, and my father's own corporate statements. The PI followed paper trails, transfers to shell accounts, loans labeled temporary, and corporate minutes where my father's signature appeared alongside high-risk ventures. My father had built a public tower. The tower had cracks. If you're watching, comment. Would you rather expose truth slowly or fling it publicly? Hit subscribe, strategy matters. Pressure rose on two fronts. The press wanted sound bites. My father's team wanted to make me look like a rebel burning bridges, while quietly negotiating asset placements in noisier venues. The irony was delicious and cruel. While they shouted moral arguments, their accountants shuffled funds to obscure lines. The forensic report began to show patterns of transfers out of high-liquidity accounts to offshore trust structures timed before public scandals. Classic asset-wringing behavior. I filed a declaratory action of my own to establish that prior transfers to me were documented loans, not gifts. I requested temporary injunctions to block any sudden estate amendments pending discovery. The court calendar blinked alive. At the hearing, Victor's counsel tried to paint me as a troubled prodigal, a headline. My counsel had one thing: a stack of receipts and a concise ledger mapping years of support. The judge, a woman with a patience worn from 10,000 family fights, heard both sides and ordered a narrow injunction. No amendments to the decedent's estate that would remove beneficiaries pending full discovery. The injunction felt like a shield. The court record reoriented the narrative from spectacle to process. Where cameras had thrived, the law demanded artifacts. Bank statements, signed notes, timestamps. We supplied them. But legal timelines are slow and people are impatient. The press continued to prowl, and my father gave an interview that evening, calm composure practiced, about family privacy and unfounded accusations. The public would not be satisfied with legal nuance. It wanted vengeance or vindication. I decided to pursue both, but on my terms. Victor called a family meeting, dinner at his club, framed as reconciliation. Of course it was staged. Family meals in that household were often public relations with salad. I went because truth sometimes needs a table. Victor rose with a practiced apology that sounded almost like words without seams. He tried to shape the conversation, to frame me as a troubled daughter who needed care and to suggest mediation. Clara, my sister, offered flexible smiles and half-truths. They kept glancing at the watches of their advisors, timing turns like choreography. I listened. I let them speak. And then I asked one quiet question. Where had funds reported as family expenses flowed in the last 5 years? There was a tick of silence, an effect I'd learned to generate by daring to ask the question that mattered. They pivoted to emotion. You're weaponizing numbers, Claire accused. You want to fight in public. Dad said, you're being ungrateful. The table's voices built until Aunt June cut through it with the bluntness of someone who'd sorted mail through the rain for 40 years. She read aloud a ledger I'd mailed to a neutral notary and then handed to a private trustee. Loans, dates, the little shorthand of a person who had been used. If you're watching this, would you rather be quietly right or loudly heard? Comment below and subscribe. Boundaries sometimes look like bookkeeping. Claire's face fell. A guest nudged a photographer to take a picture. Phones came out reflexively. But this time the camera had to take both the spectacle and the papers. Someone in the room remarked on the ugliness of airing family disputes. Aunt June answered, ugly is what happens when you take kindness for currency. Victor's face hardened. He accused me of betrayal. I said simply, show me the contract that obligates me to underwrite your life forever. There was no contract. There was only habit, and habit can be changed. After dinner a hush spread. Some left in polite outrage. Clara remained silent, her mouth thin. Victor, furious that the ledger had taken oxygen, stormed out. The photographer lingered, defeated. Outside, a man in a suit approached me and said, Miss Pierce, your father's attorney will be filing a complaint about this disclosure. I watched him go and felt the weather shift. If law is slow and press hungry, then proof is the thing that threads them. I had the thread. Discovery is a slow unspooling and it can be brutal. We subpoenaed documents. We traced transactions. We found something the press hadn't. A pattern of shell incorporations, vendor invoices that duplicated, and a corporate insurance policy moved 2 days before the gala. Asset maneuvers that looked tidy in brochures looked messy under scrutiny. My team and I prepared a limited release. Not a scream, but a measured disclosure to a respected financial magazine and to a local reporter with integrity. We showed redacted ledgers, highlighted transfers to accounts that benefited not the family trust but certain managers and executives close to Victor. We showed the judge a paper trail connecting some of Victor's charitable payments to private entities that funneled money into luxury projects. Projects that advertised the Pierce name but did not appear on fiduciary statements. If you're watching this, tell me, does exposure feel like cruelty or courage? Hit subscribe. Truth is messy and necessary. The reaction was immediate. The financial magazine published a careful piece about governance and potential conflicts of interest. The city's business reporters began to ask questions about who got paid from which accounts and why. Board members forced Victor to answer in public. He issued statements about complexity and confidentiality while his stock and reputation felt the nudge of suspicion. At the same time, Clara faced scrutiny. Emails surfaced where she'd advised certain PR placements time to divert attention from other financial stories. Her defenses crumbled when the ledger showed conversations where she had asked me to float costs, promising later reimbursement. Those promises, repeatedly unmet, created patterns the court loved. I did not seek to destroy my family. I sought to correct an economy that turned love into a ledger only I paid. The judge, finally, issued a more robust hold on significant transfers and required the appointment of an independent trustee to review estate transactions. The court's order meant Victor could not move large assets in response to family drama. It also meant the world could no longer accept his private show as the only narrative. And in the quiet after the headlines, my father's phone rang off the hook with board members' questions he couldn't easily answer. The legal process shifted the family conversation from shaming to terms. Clara came to me that afternoon after a long phone call. She had been battered by public questions and internal guilt. I was scared of losing my role, she said, voice small. I told myself protecting Dad was protecting us. She handed me an envelope with a spreadsheet and a handwritten note. A restitution plan. If you're watching, pause and ask, have you ever watched someone you love choose to change? Subscribe. Accountability is a hard, rare thing. We negotiated in a room that smelled like coffee and legal paper. Clara agreed to repay amounts she'd owed in installments. She agreed to a public correction of her posts and to enroll in financial ethics training with her team. Victor, furious, threatened countersuits and slander claims. But even he, under pressure from trustees and board oversight, agreed to a mediated settlement, a written apology to the family, a commitment to restructure the estate under independent oversight, and an agreement not to influence charitable disbursements without committee approval. Aunt June, who had stood in my corner, asked for only one thing: that the independent trustee establish a modest fund for community scholarships in our town, in exchange for the way the family had once taken for granted the town's small kindnesses. We included it in the settlement. The real victory for me was not the money recovered, which was partial and bureaucratic, but the setting of boundaries. I had converted humiliation into a sequence of checks and terms that would prevent future performance theater punishments. I had made kindness legible. That night, as the family assembled, some willing, some obliged, to sign the mediated agreement, Victor sat with the gravity of an elder learning restraint. I did not gloat. I accepted terms that acknowledged the ledger and established procedures for transparency. It felt like a small architectural change. Trust with beams, not glass. The cameras, which once sought a spectacle, now sought statements. The room had lost its appetite for easy performances. Months later, the world had moved on. The suitcases of gossip emptied. The trustees' reports landed with regularity. Clara and I had fragile, honest conversations. She learned to speak restitution in invoices and deeds. Victor's posture softened, not with contrition but with pragmatism. If you're watching, share your story below. Have you ever turned public shame into a private plan? And please don't forget to subscribe. Your silence can become a ledger only if you let it. I kept my ledger in a drawer. I kept copies with my lawyer. I kept Aunt June's thermos in the fridge and her laugh in the mornings. The scholarship fund fed 2 kids the first year. A local tutor wrote to thank me. The independent trustee flagged practices and saved millions in misallocated funds that might otherwise have been buried in another glossy campaign. On a quiet evening, I walked past the party room where the gala had been held. The velvet curtains were closed. Someone had left a bouquet on a table. I felt the tug of that night, the flash, and I felt the new weight of being my own architect. I had not sought to burn the house down. I had rewired the circuits so the lights would not turn off when someone wanted to put on a show. Before bed, I locked my front door and placed the ledger under my pillow. Weight, proof, and a promise. In the morning, I sent a simple note to the family's council. My interest is not the fortune. My interest is the system that allowed a slap to be a headline. Fix it. The reply was bland and legal, but the work had begun. When I turned the key, I felt a small, steady triumph. This was not about revenge as spectacle. It was about removing the stage. It was about making sure that the people who once found entertainment in my disgrace could no longer shape my life without consent. I slept with the ledger at my side and woke up to a quiet I had earned. She closed the door and kept the keys.